If you're following along with our schedule of lessons, tonight we're going to be talking about temperance. Now, the word you might use more often would be self-control. In 2 Peter chapter 1, when Peter's given us a list of things to add to our faith, he says, and add to your faith virtue, and to virtue knowledge, and to knowledge self-control, or in our instance here, temperance, as some translations would say. So what we're thinking about tonight, we're going to have 5 points, 5 things we look at in ways we need to have temperance or self-control. And if you're like me, this is a tough area. There's times where I have really good self-control and there's times where not as good. But as I try to grow as a Christian, because I think that's all of our goal is to grow as a Christian, the battle at times is, am I growing or not? And we all should be growing, and this is a lesson that will test your growth in self-control or temperance. So I hope that the 5 points will make sense in a way that you can evaluate yourself within each point to say, hey, as it comes to this, do I have temperance? Do I have good self-control? For example, just to get us thinking here, Al took me to a very fine meal tonight for supper. We went to Taco Bell. And that's sort of an inside joke between Al and I, as we both like Taco Bell a lot. Regardless, we have a potluck at Piney Grove every time we have a gospel meeting. And everybody comes over to our house and we have a meal set up. Every meeting we have. And in those meetings, there's always more desserts than there is regular food, always. So if we have plenty of food, when you get to desserts, there's more desserts than there are people there. So what happens is I'll tell my wife, hey, go and cut me a piece of this and that, because I'm usually talking and filled up on food that I can't eat it, but I want some later. So the problem is, Tommy, is when I have a whole coconut pie to eat, rather than just one slice, I have to have self-control not to eat the entire pie, which obviously I can't eat an entire pie, but I have to limit myself. And I think that illustration makes sense, as a lot of you understand when it comes to food, sometimes we've got to practice self-control. But these points are going to be much more serious and real as we look at these points. So think about each of these points and let's ask ourselves, are we having temperance when it comes to these points? So let's go to the first one. The first thing is we need to have temperance with our words. You ever say something you regret saying? If you said no to that, then you need to tell me after services how you do that. But as I grow as a Christian, I should say less things that I regret. I should be able to control my words and my tongue much more than I could before because of that spiritual growth and development and maturity. But I'm telling you, a lot of people struggle to temper their tongue, to control their tongue. Look at James chapter 1 at verse 19. James chapter 1 at verse 19. Let's start there. Notice what James says. As James says a lot about the tongue, we're not going to read it all. We're just going to look at this one verse. But in James 1:19 he says, wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear and slow to speak and slow to wrath. If you actually want to look on down at verse 27, he says, pure religion and undefiled before God and the Father is this, to visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction and keep himself unspotted from the world. But if you go back to verse 26, he says, if any man among you seem to be religious and bridleth not his tongue, but deceives his own heart, this man's religion is vain. I can do a lot of good things for the church. I can be a pretty well-rounded Christian, but if I can't bridle my tongue, then my whole religion can be useless. It can be thrown out because of that problem of tempering my words and my tongue. Look at 1 Timothy chapter 5 at verse 13. 1 Timothy 5 at verse 13. Notice what Paul says to Timothy here. And withal, they learn to be idle, wandering about from house to house, and not only idle, but tattlers, also in busybodies, speaking things which they ought not. Let me tell you how that works today. We don't go house to house saying things we shouldn't generally. People just get online and they do it. They just get on Facebook and they put something right there for everybody to see, and it's like, whoa, did you think about what... And that's the same idea. We're using our words just in a different manner. And they think nothing about it. People will say things online for everybody to see, because they know that, or they think they're getting away with it. Social media gives a voice to a lot of people that otherwise would be voiceless, and in a way that can be a positive thing, in a way that can be a very negative thing. But remember, God sees and hears everything, and will give account of every word, whether we type it or whether we say it. We need to temper our words. Well, just had a really bad day, and I want to vent on social media and put this out there for everybody to see that I can't control my tongue. And once it's out there, you can't put it back in. You can't take those things back. So as we read that verse, as Paul talks to Timothy, we may not be going house to house, but a lot of times we need to think about, is there really a benefit of me saying this or not? And then finally, look at Proverbs. Proverbs 17 and verse 27. Notice what Solomon says here. We talked about Solomon last night. In Proverbs 17:27, he says, he that has knowledge, that was our lesson last night in a nutshell, spares his words. Unfortunately, I like to talk a lot. So I need to be real careful about what I say. Because he says, he that has knowledge spares his words, and a man of understanding is of an excellent spirit. Are we full of wise words, beneficial words, words that build up and encourage and edify or help? Are we full of foolish words that tear down and hurt and harm and do no good? Look at chapter 15, just a page back. Proverbs 15, verses 1 and 2. A soft answer turns away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger. What do they call that? They want to what? Stir the pot. You ever heard that saying? Well, she just likes to stir the pot. He just likes to stir the pot. Daniel, you were telling me, you told somebody something earlier, and I insinuated you were listening to Paul Feinbaum. So there's some stirring the pot going on there. And if I listen to it, the only pot being stirred is with my wife and kids who are like, change the channel. We need to be careful with our words. Because we say things sometimes without thinking. And as we grow as a Christian, I need to have more temperance and self-control about what I'm saying. That's the first point we need to think about tonight. The second thing we need to think about when it comes to temperance is when it comes to spending money. I would give you a statistic on how much debt our country has, or how much debt the average family in our country has, or how much debt the average human on this planet has, but they change every minute. And the debt just gets higher and higher and higher. And unfortunately, when you have a card that you can pull out of your wallet, mine's been used about 10 times this year total, because I don't like using it, cash or check. I'm old school. But when you've got that, a lot of people, and unfortunately as a Christian, we need to temper how we spend our money and how we use the blessings God has given us as stewards to use. And a lot of people don't think about that as a Christian obligation or a Christian attribute and responsibility that we should have. I should take care of my family, my responsibilities. I should take care of my role of giving back to the Lord. And I should think about helping others. Members of the church, family, those that are in need. And you can't do those things when you have so much debt because you can't temper your spending. You can't control your spending. And they make it even easier. I looked something up on my phone that I want to purchase, Will. And then every time I get on my phone, what happens? They're showing something from that website of those products. They know I looked at a pair of shoes, and now every time I scroll down, there's a pair of those shoes from a store they're trying to sell me. Or I looked at a shirt, and now that store has an ad. They know how to get to us. And when it's so easy, you can order. People just lose control. They can't temper their habits. And this is a real problem. It's a real problem. How to stop or control emotional spending. It's not your salary that makes you rich, it's your spending habits. Turn with me to Hebrews chapter 13 at verse 5. Hebrews 13 and verse 5. There's a lot of Christians that can't be faithful Christians because of this. They're not here tonight because they're working triple overtime because they're so far in debt Why? Well, I had to have this car versus this one. I had to have this house versus this one. We've got to have these nice things instead of these. We've got to go on 5 vacations instead of 1. And all these things lead up to I can't be the Christian I'm supposed to be. I can't be at services as odd as I should. All right? Because I'm so far in debt, I got to work extra. I can't spend the time with my children I need to spend because, well, I've got to work extra. I can't get back to the Lord properly because I've decided to give it all to these things because I'm not putting God first. And I sure can't help anybody else out. Temperance, self-control of our spending habits. Here in Hebrews chapter 13 at verse 5, I told you to go and I'm still talking. Notice what the Hebrew writer says, let your conversation be without covetousness. That was one of our 10 commandments in the Old Testament. And be content with such things as you have, for he has said, I will never leave you nor forsake thee. The happiest people aren't the wealthiest people. That's okay if you're wealthy. It's not sinful at all. But you take somebody who doesn't have debt and all these problems and wants, they can appreciate the things they have much more. They can appreciate the people that love them much more, and they can live a life without as much stress and worry. And it all stems from temperance and self-control, a lot of times of spending habits. Look at Proverbs chapter 21 at verse 20. Let's go back to the wise man again. Proverbs 21 at verse 20. There's a treasure to be desired, and oil in the dwelling of the wise, but a foolish man spends it up. I see a lot of grandparents that have worked their entire life saving and living off nothing, all for their grandkids to come along and to just waste it. With no work ethic, with no responsibility, just blow through it. Unfortunately, one of the problems we have nowadays is faithful Christians who don't have parents in the home. They love God, they believe in the sound doctrine and truth, but the problem is mom and daddy are both working so many hours that grandma and grandpa are raising the kids. Neighbor and friends are raising the kids. And don't get me wrong, everybody needs help from time to time. My mother has one of my kids tonight. So I'm not trying to say you can't let your kids spend time with their relatives or your loved ones. That happens. But I had my kids. It's my responsibility to raise them. If I have to work less hours or I have to quit a job, that's my God-given ability and I need to perform it. That's my role according to the Scripture. I know the world would tell me do whatever you want, be happy, go make money. What would God say? And if I had better temperance in my financial spending, this wouldn't be a problem. If I could be more content with what I had, I wouldn't have to work 6 jobs, nor would my wife or everybody else. And that's something we need to think about because that's something a lot of Christians don't take serious nowadays. It's just so looked over and so used to happening that it's not thought of. And everybody with good judgment and discernment can know when they're doing just enough. When they've got an opportunity to still be mom and dad or grandma and grandpa or still raise their children. I was talking to Brooke this summer about these interest rates. You remember that, Brooke? We were talking about Jerome Powell and raising these rates. They're still not done. We have to be careful and have temperance here. And then finally in Proverbs 22 verse 7, notice what he says. The rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender. I didn't make that up. Webster didn't make that up. That's not on Wikipedia. That's in the Holy Bible. That's in the book of Proverbs. So what about us? Do we have temperance and self-control in our spending? Now my dad taught me something long ago. You got to spend money to make money, and I believe that 100%. Absolutely, he's right. But as a Christian, you've got to understand self-control, contentment, and how to handle these things as God has blessed us with. Thirdly, when it comes to temperance, what about our reactions? This is one where certain people really struggle. My mom's not here tonight, but if she were, she could tell you this is true. I'll be preaching, and I'll look out, and there sits my mom, and I may say something that was great or terrible. And she's going to have a reaction like, it doesn't matter how I say it's going to be. And that's not even what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is when somebody does something or says something that maybe offends you, or maybe you don't agree with it completely, and we react insensibly. We react not like a Christian should, and we lose it. We say something, we do something, we act a way where it's like, is that how I should have reacted in that moment? And again, as we mature and grow as a Christian, we're adding to our faith virtue, knowledge, and self-control or temperance. How do I react to certain situations? Do I need to temper my reactions? Look at 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 23. 1 Peter 2, at verse 23. Who, when he was reviled, talking about Jesus Christ, reviled not again. When he suffered, he threatened not, but committed himself to him that judges righteously. Now here's what that's saying. A lot of people today, when they suffer, guess what they want to do? I want to fight back. I'm going to say something back. They said it to me, well now it's my turn to react and say it to them. They did it to me, I'm going to react and do it to them. I can't believe this happened. I'm going tomorrow to that school and I'm going to lay down the law. The person just cut me off, I'm going to honk my horn and I'm going to say something ugly to them. That's not how a Christian reacts. Not a mature, growing, faithful Christian. Maybe someone who's not a Christian or has just obeyed the gospel and is learning the ropes, but as we grow, I need to temper and have control of my reactions. That way I don't do something that I regret for a long time. Going back to the well in Proverbs 14 at verse 29. Proverbs chapter 14 at verse 29, he says, he that is slow to wrath is of great understanding, but he that is hasty of spirit, he that reacts hastily and can't control his or her spirit exalts folly. And that's not a positive thing to be said about us. How do we handle our spirit? Hastily, where we react without thinking, right? And then in Ecclesiastes chapter 7 at verse 9, he says, be not hasty. There's that same idea. Be not hasty in your spirit to be angry, for anger rests in the bosom of fools. Be not hasty. Think about your reactions in certain situations. There's times where something happens and we react in a way where later say, you know what, I wish I could have handled that differently. I wish I would have handled that differently. And as we grow spiritually, we need to consider our reactions and temper and have self-control and self-restraint of these reactions. At the bottom of the screen you see some things I put in there. If you lose self-control, everything will fail or fall. Never do something permanently foolish just because you're temporarily upset. We need to show self-restraint and temperance when it comes to our reactions. Fourthly, we need to have temperance when it comes to our thoughts. Is that a tough one for you? It's tough for me. It's tough for me to focus with my mind in the way that I should all the time. Sometimes my thoughts just get out in left field. Sometimes they get into negative areas. Sometimes they get into jealous areas. Sometimes they get into anger. I just need to control my thoughts at times. And I tell you, one of the best things that I can say up here is to be positive. Be optimistic. Be hopeful. Think positive, because thoughts are like the steering wheel that moves our life in the right direction. When you control your thoughts and emotions, you can control everything. Look at Philippians chapter 4 with me. Philippians 4 verse 8. Notice what Paul says here in Philippians 4 at verse 8. You probably know this passage, but as I read this, I want you to think about your thoughts. If you're an Auburn fan, listen to this passage. If you're a Florida fan, listen to this passage. Finally, brethren, whatsoever things, Matt, you with me? Whatsoever things are true, honest, whatsoever things are pure, lovely, a good report, if there be any virtue and if there be any praise, think on these things. Think about that for a minute. Everything in your life seems to be going downhill. Hopefully not. You had a bad week. You had a bad day. You've had a bad time in life. Something hasn't gone. People will just give up. They'll just turn to negative thoughts. They'll just be pessimistic. They're giving up on so many things. And You can see it. We need to temper our thoughts and think about positive and good and lovely and pure, things of a good report. I know that one of the things you're working on is putting a bulletin board up in the foyer with the goal intended of putting the preachers you support outside of O'Neill and the work that's being done. Think about those things. Look into who you're supporting, the good work that's being done, the reports they're sending. When you get news that if someone's obeyed the gospel at a church down the road here in Athens or Limestone County, think about those things. When you see these kids up here that were in the Bible drill class last night, dwell on those things. Don't dwell on Fox News, CNN News. My grandma, when she was alive, I loved her with all my heart. But every time I walked in her house, you know what was on TV? Shirley, do you know what? Fox News. And I watch it sometimes. I can't say I've never watched it. But every time she's on Fox News, so every time, guess what speech I get? Oh boy, the world will be gone, and it'll be gone tomorrow. We will never see another day. This planet will be, just constant negativity. And I understand it, because if I watch it, then I'm going to do the same. Monica, do you know how bad things are getting? We might as well just, use up our savings now, because in a year or two it ain't going to be there. You just get negative thoughts. Temper those things. Control those things. Our faith is in God. Our home is above. And when you can learn to temper those thoughts and keep God first and believe that and understand that, you can do a much better job of being positive, being optimistic, and being faithful as a Christian. It's very easy to let negativity set in, to let bad things set in. We need to make sure we temper our thoughts. Look at Colossians chapter 3. We'll see this better here as Paul tells the Colossians here. In Colossians 3, verses 2 through 5, he says, set your affection on things above. Well, the things that I have affection for, I think about. Not on things on the earth. For you are dead, and your life is hid with Christ in God. When Christ, who is our life, shall appear, then shall you also appear with Him in glory. Mortify therefore your members which are upon the earth, fornication, uncleanness, inordinate affection, evil conspicuousness, and covetousness, which is idolatry. Don't think about all these things. Think about things above, things that are eternal. And I say that knowing that that's hard. I know how difficult it is not to get caught up in this world and to concentrate on it. And sometimes we have to think about it because our job depends on it, our life depends on it. But our focus should be on things above. And we need to temper that. We need to control that. One thing I've always said is when we got the kids around, don't say anything negative. Let's don't talk about anything bad. Shelter them from this. And as adults, it's the same way. We have such hope in Christ Jesus our Savior, in God our Creator. And we're so blessed to be focused on negative and bad and evil things. Look at another passage in Proverbs 17 verse 22. We keep going back to Solomon here for some sage thoughts. Proverbs 17 verse 22. A merry heart does good like a medicine, but a broken spirit dries the bones. Listen to that verse. We're going to be talking about suffering tomorrow night, so if you can be here, please be here. But a merry heart, what does it do? It's like medicine. Anybody in here ever take the Reader's Digest? Shirley, did you ever take the Reader's Digest? My grandmother on the other side used to take the Reader's Digest. And you know what part I like to look at? Laughter is the best medicine. That's the only part I read. Now that I'm an adult, I might read more, but that's all I want to read because I wanted to pick up on the jokes so I could tell them to other people. Laughter's the best medicine. And he's saying here something very similar. A merry heart does good like a medicine, but a broken spirit dries the bones. Some people get so broken and down with their thoughts that they just go into a hole and they're hermit and they hide and they dry up. And then when you try to talk to them about their faith and spiritual things, negativity, lack of faith, and lack of temperance of their thoughts has set in. One more passage and we'll move on to our last point. Psalms 139. Psalm 139 verses 23 and 24. Search me, O God. See if this sounds familiar from a song we might sing. and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts. And see if there be any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. Now pretend God is doing this to you right now. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts. There's a lot of people that wouldn't want somebody to know their thoughts. But God knows our thoughts. And we need to make sure that we temper and have control of those thoughts, even though that's very difficult. As a Christian, as we grow, we need to add that self-control and temperance to our lives when it comes to our thoughts. And then finally, I want to end with a bang here. We need to have temperance and self-control with our emotions. Hey, can we even preach on this, Matt? Daniel, is this a subject I can preach on? Because, a lot of people would say, hold on now. We need to temper our emotions. A lot of people just let their emotions run them up. Their happiness. Sometimes when we're happy, that's great. We want to be happy. But people do foolish things at times when they get it out of control. What about sadness? Sometimes when people are sad, they don't control it, and they just allow it to not let them be themselves. Fear, disgust, anger. I think anger is a big one. Wrath. We need to control our emotions. If we were to go down the local ball game, West Limestone's going to take on the Athens Golden Eagles, or Athens Bible School is going to take on the Elkmont Red Devils, I think it is, or Ardmore is going to play Clements. I think I've got most of our crowd here. If that's going to happen, and I see Tommy Smith in the crowd, and he's yelling at the refs, and he's got his walking stick, and he's hitting people with it, and he's in a fight, and it's all over YouTube next week, how's that going to look for the church? When Tommy's made 48 News getting in a fight at his granddaughter's volleyball game. And I say that, and everybody's a lot of people's laughing, and there's a few people that say, no, I've seen that happen. Not Tommy, but they've seen it happen, they hadn't seen Tommy do that. Let me correct myself. But they've seen it happen, Al. We know what I'm talking about. You can get online, and every college this week, there was a soccer game in Indonesia where something happened, and there was 120-something people killed at a soccer game because it got out of control. People can't control their emotions. You can drive home tonight, as I've already mentioned, somebody cut you off or drive by you and do or say something ugly because they can't control their emotions. People get on the internet, as I've already mentioned, social media, they say stuff that they shouldn't say because they can't control their emotions. People go out and they make mistakes when they're young. They take a drink of alcohol. Peer pressure involved. There's some emotion behind that. Somebody gets mad and they yell something at their husband or their wife that they married and they love, and now they're saying evil things and doing evil things to their husband or their wife. Why? They can't control their emotions. We need to have temperance and self-control of our emotions. In Proverbs chapter 16 at verse 32. Proverbs 16 at verse 32. He that is slow to anger, there's an emotion, is better than the mighty, and he that rules his spirit than he that takes a city. We mentioned this in our Bible class Sunday, but we're constantly here at Bible services, in our studies, in our worship, in our Bible classes, and we're training, we're practicing for real world events. Because in here, you shouldn't be prone to sin. There shouldn't be many temptations here. But when we go to work and school and out in the world, there's them temptations coming at us. So here's what we're preparing for: to control our spirit, to control our emotions. We used to, I would have said something that I shouldn't have said. I would have done something. I would let my anger get the best of me. I would have gotten so disappointed and sad. I would have been envious. But I'm growing as a Christian. I'm developing. And I want to have control of these emotions. And I want to think rationally. Do you go shopping when you're starving to death? If you hadn't ate in 2 days and you walk down the aisles at Walmart or Publix or Foodland, I don't suggest that time to shop. I suggest you go and eat something to get good and full, then go, because then you're going to make more rational decisions. And a lot of times we don't rule our own spirit and our emotions, and we do things that Christians shouldn't do because of emotions. Look at Proverbs 12 verse 16. A fool's wrath is presently known, but a prudent man covers shame. That means that a fool lets it know right then that he or she can't control their emotions. They're just going to let it out. Well, I can't believe that so-and-so said that to me. I'm going to tell them off. I'm going to do it right here in front of everybody at the church and set a bad example, hurt somebody's feelings, be a bad look to our visitors. I'm just going to let it know. That's not the attitude of a Christian. We're to control these things. In Proverbs 29 at verse 11, a fool utters all his mind, but a wise man keeps it in till afterwards. Listen to that. Till after. Control. There's that control. It was there. We kept it in. We didn't say it. My wife does that a lot. I'll get ready and I'll say, how'd I look? And she keeps it in. She don't say, you look terrible. Now sometimes she'll say, that don't match. Matt, you can't wear the striped tie with a striped shirt. I've learned that rule. I don't know why, but you can't do it. And that's what happened. But she'll control it. And then later she'll say, you might want to look in the mirror and see how it looks. Or I'm not sure that. She tries to handle it with a little care. And no matter what she cooks, I have self-control. I eat it, I say it's the best thing I ever ate, Heidi. It gets better every time. Now, I say some of those things and you get the humor in that, but in life when it's more real, how do we control our emotions? Are we doing that as a Christian should? Let's turn to one more passage here. Look at 2 Timothy 1 at verse 7. 2 Timothy 1 at verse 7. Notice what Paul says to Timothy here. For God has not given us the spirit of fear. I want you to really listen because I don't have the answer here. I just want you to think about this with me, okay? Let's think about this together because we had COVID come up in 2020. I can't even remember now. And what did it do? It made us think. At first we said, well, look, we don't know what this is. We care. But over time, there's a fear that's kept some people from coming back to worship God. From some churches have opened it. And you think, is this what God would have us to live like this for the rest of our lives? Notice what he says. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. And then in Revelation 21 at verse 8, he talks about the fearful will be cast to the lake of fire. We need to control that emotion. Whatever emotions we have, it's okay to have emotions. But we need to control those emotions. What about us? Do we need to temper our emotions and have better self-control there? In conclusion, a man in the Scripture that shows me the best example of this was Daniel. And the way he did it was he purposed in his heart ahead of time. Does that make sense? Let's try to think about that. I'm going to a ball game tonight. I know it's two rivals that are going to be playing. I need to tell myself that I'm not going to say or do anything that would look bad. I'm going to a family get-together tonight, and my in-laws just might not love me the most. I'm going to think about how I can turn. I'm going to be driving down the road where there's a lot of crazy drivers, and somebody might say or something or make me mad. I'm going to control this. Whatever the case is, we need to prepare ourselves so that we handle these situations. Look at Daniel chapter 1. I told you it was the last time we turned. I'm sorry I told you a fib, but let's look at Daniel 1 together. Daniel chapter 1. And what we're going to do is just look at a couple passages and the lesson will be yours. We're in Daniel chapter 1. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at verse 8 to start with. Daniel chapter 1, and what we're going to do is start at verse 8, and then go to verse 10. But Daniel purposed in his heart, he prepared himself, that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. He prepared for this moment. Verse 10, and the prince of the eunuchs said unto Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who has appointed your meat and your drink. For why should he see your faces worse liking than the children which are of your sword? Then shall you make me endanger my head to the king. Verse 15 and 16. And at the end of 10 days, their countenance appeared fairer and fatter and fleshed than all the children which did eat the portion of the king's meat. Thus Melzar took away the portion of their meat and the wine which they should drink and gave them pulse. He purposed in his heart that he wouldn't do it, and it worked. When we're trying to temper things in our life, have better self-control, we need to purpose in our heart that we're going to work on these things. We're going to prepare for these moments, and we're going to do better. And in Galatians 5, verse 23, when we see the fruits of the Spirit, one of those things in there, temperance. That's why we want to temper ourselves in any way that you can think of and grow in self-control as a Christian. Do you have Christ-like temperance in your life? I can imagine when Jesus was on that cross and we sing that song, He could have called 10,000 angels. He had to have control and temperance not to do it, because He could have. At any time, He could have performed a miracle and showed them who He really was, which He did perform miracles. He could have done so many things in so many instances, but He tempered Himself and He controlled Himself as the Son of God and as our Savior. And we're to follow in His footsteps and His example. Temperance is moderation in the things that are good and total abstinence from the things that are foul. You need self-control in an out-of-control world. What about us tonight? Maybe one of these 5 points makes a lot of sense to you in your life and you've struggled with it. Maybe more than one. Maybe there's something that wasn't on here, but you can think of something in your life that you've had trouble with self-control and temperance. The goal is, as we continue to grow as Christians, as we're trying to get to heaven, is that we have more temperance and self-control as we grow closer to God, so that we can be a better example, a better ambassador for Christ, and we can better perform our roles as good stewards, as children of God. Tonight, if you're not a Christian, we want to encourage you to become one. We want to see you inherit those blessings that children of God have. That avenue of prayer, that forgiveness of sins, that hope of salvation, that brotherhood of other Christians to associate with. If you've been considering obeying the gospel and we can help you, let us know. We want to help you. If you've done that but you haven't had the best self-control and temperance in your life and you've got some things you need to change, I encourage you, like I encourage myself, to go home and try to develop and grow and purpose in your heart that you're going to work on these things and have better self-control and temperance in your life. Whatever the case is, if you've got a need tonight, maybe you want the prayers of the saints or you have a request, if we have any way we can help you, why don't you come and sing the song that's been selected.